I'm Stacey Galandi with Ask the Doctor, a LifeScript Cedars-Sinai Women's Health Report. Irritable bowel syndrome is a painful disorder that strikes 1 in 6 people, mostly women. Its symptoms, cramps, gas, and diarrhea, can happen without warning and have embarrassing consequences, and relief is hard to come by. That's because IBS has been considered a stress-related illness that's all in our heads, right? Wrong. IBS is triggered by a common tummy upset. Food poisoning, says Dr. Mark Pimentel, director of the GI Motility Program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. LifeScript.com's Mark Pimentel has more.
When Ellen Corney began having bad cramps and diarrhea, she knew something was terribly wrong. But it wasn't until she went searching for a diagnosis online that the interior designer discovered it was irritable bowel syndrome. The symptoms were unmistakable.
It's not life-threatening, but there are moments when you just feel like you just want to.
Corney found help from Dr. Pimentel, but not before hitting the bottom, so to speak.
Well, I think driving to Las Vegas in a diaper was one of the lowest points I ever had in my life.
Corney learned by trial and error which foods caused a gut reaction.
You can't have sugars, no desserts, breads are no good. I mean, the list is endless.
Dr. Pimentel agrees that there are foods like sugar that intensify symptoms, but he explains that IBS is caused by an overgrowth of bacteria in your stomach, which is a direct result of food poisoning.
When the gut nerves are damaged because of the food poisoning, the gut doesn't flow correctly. It's like a river that's not flowing well. If it's not flowing well, it becomes stagnant and bacteria build up. So we try to identify that the bacteria have built up, and then we treat the bacteria with an antibiotic.
Until recently, however, many medical professionals firmly believed IBS was a psychological problem.
We came along and we were not focused on the abdominal pain, which a lot of others were focused on. We focused on bloating. And we know that bacteria of the gut can produce gas, and maybe that's where the bloating was coming from.
All it takes to diagnose IBS is a simple breath test.
We give you a sugar to trigger fermentation in the gut, and we're able to see on the breath how bad things are.
Now Dr. Pimentel is treating IBS with antibiotics and getting great results with patients like Ellen Corney.
They usually respond within 10 days of the antibiotic, and it doesn't matter how long they've had it. Patients come to my office, they've had IBS for 20 years, and then 10 days later they respond just as well as a person who's had it for 2 years.
And even though she's still recovering, Corney can now joke about her IBS journey.
There I was in Las Vegas in adult diapers, and the biggest crapshoot was not in the casinos. It was whether I could last the night.
From Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, I'm Mari Cartel.
Mari, thank you so much. Now we turn to Dr. Mark Pimentel for more on his research into this painful condition. Dr. Pimentel, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
There are so many women who are still suffering unnecessarily from IBS. Why is that?
Well, irritable bowel syndrome is a very common condition. 30 million people in the U.S. have this condition. I don't think people realize how common it is. IBS was thought of as a psychological condition or that it was in your head. We now know that's not true. Stress can exacerbate IBS. It can make IBS worse on that day. But patients will say, when I'm on vacation, completely relaxed, I still have my IBS symptoms. They're just not quite as bad as on stressful days.
Is IBS being diagnosed accurately, or are women just being dismissed as having mystery symptoms?
Well, irritable bowel syndrome is a cluster of symptoms. It includes bloating, abdominal discomfort, and then erratic bowel movements. So if you can imagine a patient or a disease state where you wake up in the morning, you know exactly what your day is going to be like, you can handle it. But if you don't know anything of what your day is going to be like, it's unpredictable, it's really difficult and challenging for these patients.
So food poisoning is the primary cause of IBS?
Well, we don't know the mechanism of how that happens, but definitely out of 100 people who develop food poisoning, 10 will develop IBS from it. And so we know food poisoning is a cause of IBS and probably accounts for most of IBS in the country.
How many doctors does it take before someone is actually seeing you for help?
And it may be 3 or 4 physicians before they end up in my office or with somebody who's looking at more modern approaches to irritable bowel syndrome.
What are the steps that you do as a doctor to try to help somebody who has IBS?
Well, the interesting thing we discovered with this antibiotic approach is that patients will get 80 to 90% better after the antibiotic. And the antibiotic we use doesn't get absorbed. It stays in the gut and has no side effects. Even if the bacteria were to come back over time, the antibiotic works again and again and again, which is really fortunate because some antibiotics have problems with resistance.
So how would you advise someone to manage having IBS?
Well, I think the first thing you want to try to do is diet. Diet's the easiest thing for a primary care physician. And I recommend 3 things. Avoid sugars that are not digested by humans, avoid beans, and avoid fiber as much as possible.
What would you say are the steps that women can take to prevent or minimize their chances of getting IBS?
Well, I think just avoid food poisoning, which is a difficult thing to do. But it's really important that if you have symptoms of IBS, that you need to see a doctor and have the doctor make the diagnosis.
Dr. Pimentel, thank you so much. I'm sure this information will prove very helpful to those of us suffering from irritable bowel syndrome. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Now, for more information, you can visit our Digestive Health Center at lifescript.com and Cedars-Sinai at cedars-sinai.edu. This has been Ask the Doctor, a LifeScript Cedars-Sinai Women's Health Report. I'm Stacey Galandi.